My name is Manfred Helber and I'm a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in the category Cloud and Data Center. As we have already learned in one of our previous modules, the Azure Stack HCI Basics, we receive regular updates for our Azure Stack HCI cluster. So they are the monthly security and quality updates. They are the same Tuesday timeline where they are published like we have for Windows, Windows Server, Windows Client. We have also the situation that we'll receive a feature update, so a new version with new functionalities, with extended functionalities, actually once a year. Microsoft announced when Azure Stack HCI was launched at an Ignite conference, I have the original text here, that there will be once or twice per year the feature updates. The initial version of Azure Stack HCI was version 20H2 in October or 2020, and the next version was Azure Stack HCI 21H2, and it was published at the end of 2021. So important is to know that actually the customers have to upgrade from 20HR2 to 21H2 latest till 19th April 2022. So there is some time you have to upgrade, but as always with these as a service concepts, you also have to upgrade. It's not the 10-year long-term servicing timeline we have with the Windows Server. The idea behind Azure Stack HCI is to have an always updated latest version, but for sure Microsoft gives you some time to upgrade your systems so you don't have to immediately upgrade when Microsoft publishes a new version. There we will have some time. Here we had something like 6 months since the publishing date of version 21H2 and the date where you have to install it. So the next version will be something like 2020HX. So actually there's no announcement what the exact version naming will be, but you already can test this preview version and it makes sense to keep this here. And it seems that we will have one new version also in 2022 and not 2 new versions. But this is not absolutely documented here. So what we know, we get minimum 1 new feature update and we get the monthly quality updates. This is what you can rely on. And we have seen several extensions we received in Windows Admin Center and also for Azure Stack HCI while we were using it, while it was updated on the regular period. So the question is how to upgrade it, because it's in cluster. Azure Stack HCI is a high available solution, and for sure we want to care about this solution and ensure that even in the situation of an update, the workload stays online. And we will now have a look in a live demo how to update an Azure Stack HCI cluster. I will select here the Azure Stack HCI cluster 20. This is our 2-node cluster. We have the similar experience with a 3, a 4, a 5-node cluster, but for sure this will need more time to upgrade these clusters because we have to upgrade more nodes. So with this cluster, everything is fine, and so I can choose the update module here in the tools list. So there's a dedicated update section. Before we start with the update, it's recommended to back up the cluster to ensure that you can restore a previous version if ever anything goes wrong. So usually there should be no issues with the update, but as always, if you have critical changes, the recommendation is to have a backup. I'm using for the first time this updating mechanism in Windows Update Center for this cluster. And here we can see to deploy updates across the cluster, we first add the cluster-aware updating role. So there's a specific role that's responsible for automatically updating the cluster. And yeah, we want to install this cluster-aware updating role. Here we can see it's configuring cluster-aware updating, and it's adding the cluster-aware updating role to the cluster. Still will take a while till this cluster-aware updating is installed on exactly this 2-node cluster here, and it's an action per cluster. You remember we had 2 additional modules where we deployed a 3-node and a 4-node cluster. When we use the update mechanism, the automatic updating, we also need to install the cluster-aware updatings there. But as you have seen, it's not a big step. It's only clicking on yes, I want to have the cluster-aware updating. It's configured in this target cluster. You have to wait a few minutes, and then you can start with the updating progress. So we have seen it was checking for updates, and here I can read updates are available. Microsoft recommends me to apply these updates. So the interesting thing is here I also will see the feature updates. If there's a next version for Azure Stack HCI, I will see the updates here for the new features, and I will show you the update mechanism to a new version in a few screenshots, because my clusters here in this course are all installed with version 21H2, but I've documented the upgrade process for you, how to move from 20H2 to 21H2. You have a few remaining days if you are still on the previous version, but you can also get an impression later when we work with the screenshotted step-by-step information, how the experience will be if you upgrade to the next version. And for sure, we will update this video in this course as soon as the next version of Azure Stack HCI is published, and then we will show you how to upgrade to the version we will receive in the calendar year 2020. So we can see we have updates on both nodes. And here I can see I have a little imbalance here because I have a missing security update, an additional update on the server 2020. On the 21 server, I only have 3 updates. Maybe you remember the module about deploying the Azure Stack HCI clusters. There I had a warning in my validation that there is an update missing on one of the servers. So I could check for updates again, or I can decide for install the updates here. And the great thing is here, remember we have a 2-node cluster. And in a production environment, we will have production workload on this 2-node cluster. When the update process starts, and let's install here, then I will explain the next steps, then the cluster-aware updating ensures that everything stays online. So this step we have already seen in the deployment wizard for Azure Stack HCI. This tells us check for hardware updates. We couldn't find any extensions that support your specific hardware, so we will skip this step for now. You can also download extension packages to a file share or local drive and try again. This can be helpful if you are not connected to the internet. Remember, we deployed our demo clusters here on virtual machines. In the next module, in one of the next modules, where we will talk about the GPU support, we will work with a physical cluster because we have physical GPUs there. Here in my virtual machines, for sure, I don't have any hardware updates. And it's important, the hardware updates are provided for the integrated systems. So an validated node, your OEM partner, could offer updates for the hardware, but it's optional for him. For an integrated system, it's mandatory. So one requirement one of the many requirements for integrated systems is that your OEM has to provide the integrated hardware updates here. For all the other systems, it's optional. This means here firmware updates and things like this. As we know, if you have some technical experience with server hardware, you can also install these firmware updates manually here. So let's go to the next step to install the updates. Here we can see I can review the updates again, and then via clicking on install, the installation starts of these updates, starting the update run. And as soon as the update run has started, I will explain you how it works and how it keeps your workload online while the cluster is updated. Okay, here we can see installing updates. Wait until updates is completed before using any other tools to update this cluster. This is important to ensure that there are no conflicts, and I think you know how critical it is when you are installing updates that you don't turn off your nodes, you don't restart them manually, you don't interrupt the updating progress, because if you interrupt it, it may happen that you have an inconsistent situation here. So what's happening? On the node 2020, it started with this one. The updates are installing. The second one is waiting. So we have here these two states, actually installing, waiting. To ensure that your workload keeps online, the cluster uses live migration to move the existing workload from the node that is actually in maintenance. So the cluster we're updating will evacuate one node via live migration. It will update this node, restart this node automatically, check if everything is up and running. Then it will evacuate the other node, install everything, restart it, and it's an automatic process. We already see how easy this is with a 2-node cluster. You can imagine if you have a 3, 4, 5, 6-node cluster, you will even save more time because you don't have to do it manually. In the past, when you know traditional Windows Server clusters, before we had cluster-aware updating, we always had to put a node to maintenance, update this node, restart the node, check manually if everything is fine, then put the next node to maintenance, update this node, and so on, so that the cluster update sometimes took hours or nearly days for an administrator, where his time was blocked doing this. Because of manual steps there, you could make failures, you could have issues on each node, and here it's fully automated and it ensures that your workload stays online. To ensure that the workload stays online, for sure you need a cluster that's configured accordingly. So this means we need a witness configuration. We have to ensure that everything is up and running. But also the cluster where updating checks these relevant and important parameters. So now the updates were installed on the first node, and the first node is now restarting. So we have the restart here, and the second node is waiting for the next steps. And I don't have to schedule this restart manually, so the restart is scheduled automatically. The node is restarted. The node is in maintenance actually. The workload was moved to my node 21 here. In a 3 or 4 node cluster or more cluster node cluster, the workload can be distributed across the remaining nodes. So we don't have to move the full workload on a single node. So on the first node, the updates were applied. So the cluster were updated and started with my second node, but here we can see updates are applied, and on the second node, the updates are actually installing, then the node will be restarted, and then we are finished here in this 2-node cluster. So now also the second node has been updated, updates have been applied, everything is good here. So the nodes are back up and running, the workload is redistributed again, and in the update history, we could check when the last updates were installed. So if you know, maybe you should have any issues, you can review in the history when updates were installed. Now in this live demo, we have seen how to update an Azure Stack HCI cluster with the monthly feature updates. I already mentioned that we will use some screenshots to see how the update progress to a new version looks like. The steps are very similar. We go to Updates in Windows Admin Center, but if there's a new version available, we have an additional option here. We can decide for installing quality updates only, or to install also the feature updates. This is recommended, but for sure, maybe you need some planning. So for example, for Azure Stack HCI 20H2, when it was released, initially we didn't have a System Center Virtual Machine Manager version that was supported for this new version of Azure Stack HCI. System Center, especially System Center Virtual Machine Manager 2022, is now released. So if you are a customer that uses System Center Virtual Machine Manager, you can upgrade your System Center Virtual Machine Manager and then upgrade your Azure Stack HCI cluster. So there might be reasons why you don't want to install the feature update immediately. The recommendation is to use them. You are not charged extra for them because you have a subscription. These new versions are included. This is the reason why you can decide here for switching. We always get information what's included in the feature update. Here we had some GPU support for clustered virtual machines, improved processor, CPU compatibility, adjustable storage speed, and so on. And we always have to learn more, so we have informations about this new version. If you switch to quality updates only, you will see a information message that says it's recommended to have the feature updates and it's required to update within 6 months. I discussed this before when we started with this update and upgrade topic, that we usually have a new version once a year and we have typically to install within 6 months. So in this update progress from 20H2 to 21H2, we had exactly this 6 months. So let's have a look how the steps are when we decide for feature updates. Then the first thing is that the readiness check has more steps because it's validating if the hardware of this Azure Stack HCI cluster is compatible with the next version. If we have new technologies in there, maybe we have to check if this new functionality is also compatible with the existing hardware. So we might see some warnings. I had a warning with the cluster validation in the system configuration. We often see this if we have different software levels because of some missing smaller quality updates, or usually it's a Defender update because we receive this on a regular basis that's missing on one of the nodes. You can review the warnings, see the detailed information, and then decide if you first want to fix the warnings. If you have an error here, it's similar to the validation report. When you create a new cluster, you cannot upgrade. With a warning, it's your decision. Best is to have every step passed here. So here is an important thing, because here you can decide if you want to update the cluster functional level to enable new features, or if you want to upgrade this level afterwards. If you upgrade these functional levels immediately, then you will not be able to roll back the installation. you will never have a guarantee that the rollback will work, but it's clear that the rollback will not be possible if you upgraded already the levels. So it's your decision to do it immediately or do it afterwards. If you upgrade the level afterwards, you have to do it manually. So then in the next step, when you click on install, the update run starts, similar to the quality updates we have seen in the live demo. Then we have the same cluster-aware updating mechanism. So the first node is updated, the workload stays online, but now we have a different message. It's not installing updates, it's installing new OS. So you can see it's installing a new OS version. Then updates are applied on the first node. Then we can see the OS is installed on the second node, and then the cluster is fully updated. What's important, depending on your choice when you started the update, you have to go to the settings of the cluster and decide to switch to a new pool version here. The pool is not updated automatically, as we have seen in our wizard here. This is good, has good reasons, because we cannot revert this pool version upgrade. But if we want to use all the new features, so for example, the storage thin provisioning, the adjustable repair speed and things like this, we have to move to the new storage pool version. It's very easy to do this because we can select in this drop-down list here for the newer storage pool version. Where you might be a little bit wondering, this is a screenshot from an Azure Stack HCI 21H2 cluster. The storage pool versions that are provided here are Windows Server 2019 when we were previously on 20H2. In our clusters we deployed here in this video modules, we didn't have the Windows Server 2019 storage pool version because they were initially the Azure Stack HCI 21H2. Here in this upgraded cluster, I can decide to switch to the newer version, but it's not version 1.2.3 or storage pool version Azure Stack HCI 20H2 or 21H2. It's Windows Server 2019 and Windows Server 2022. It's only a naming here. This means older version, newer version. So when we decide for the newer version here, Windows Server 2022, I will see an additional message: increasing the storage pool version can't be undone. It's an important decision, but you shouldn't be afraid here. This usually works if everything is okay with your cluster actually, but it's always a good idea to have a backup before you decide for such unrevertible or steps that can't be undone. When you upgrade it, you will see these new features here. So I mentioned the default provisioning type, fixed or thin, storage repair speed, and things like this.